So I recently read Stephen Houlgate's book Hegel on Being, and I thought I would record some impressions of it. And the context here is that I used to be really into philosophy, but several years ago I became skeptical of it and stopped reading it entirely. And since then, I've just picked it up once in a while, on occasion, just for fun, because, name one thing that's more fun than Hegel. See, you can't. Now, what I'm trying to do with this audio recording here is just have a little bit of fun, okay? We're just having a bit of a lark here, a bit of a goof. So I'm not holding myself to my usual standards of rigor. So take everything I say here with a grain of salt. And should any Hegel bros happen to listen to this, they may well end up screaming at me through their monitors, much like Walter White screaming at Hank through the window of the car. So, sorry, not sorry. Don't at me, Hegel bros. Now, Houlgate is, much like Hegel himself, a miniaturist in the sense that he's attentive to every little step that Hegel makes, and he explains it all very lucidly, which I admire. The downside of that is that the first 100 pages of the book are devoted to purely methodological and preparatory work, so I did get a little bit antsy reading it. Got me feeling a little bit like Milhouse watching Itchy and Scratchy, like, when are they gonna get to the fireworks factory? Now, Houlgate does also show you that he's got your back when Hegel is being a jerk. Like, for example, when Hegel says something particularly obnoxious, like, nothing, Hegel explains, can also be understood as the mere not, nicht. The negative, by contrast, is not the not by itself, but the not, or non, that is a moment of non-being and of negative quality. When Hegel says something like that, sometimes Houlgate pops in to interject, now the reader may at this point become infuriated with Hegel. And I'm like, yes, as a matter of fact I am. I feel seen. Thank you for acknowledging that my feelings are valid. Personally, I've always had a certain degree of interest in Hegel because my favorite philosopher was Kant. And so I read books like Friedrich Beiser's German Idealism, as well as a couple of books specifically on Hegel, but I never really did a deep dive on him, so my knowledge of him is pretty superficial. One Hegelian who I did read back in the day is Robert Pippin, and I've always kind of liked him because, A, his name is Pippin, so whenever I read him I think, fool of a toque. And it's even better because he actually has a book called Hegel's Realm of Shadows. In the land of Hegel, where the shadows lie. So that's reason A why I like him, and reason B is because his reading of Hegel is a relatively Kantian one, so that makes it a bit more accessible and appealing to me than some of the more metaphysically extravagant readings. Now, Houlgate disagrees substantially with Pippin's reading of Hegel, and I listened to a podcast interview with Houlgate, and he seems like a smart and likable guy, and he's at U Warwick, which, if you ask me, constitutes a substantial upgrade in the quality of their philosophy department there compared to the days of Nick Land. But anyway, from Houlgate's perspective, Pippin's Hegel starts from a phenomenological position, i.e. he starts by examining consciousness, and in doing so he presumes a subject, and in particular a subject possessing the transcendental unity of apperception. And the transcendental unity of apperception is a Kantian concept that refers to the unity of subject that self-consciously possesses objects in its consciousness. So basically what Houlgate is saying is that Pippin's Hegel presumes too much. He presumes this unified subject from the get-go, and you're not allowed to do that from Houlgate's perspective, because Houlgate's Hegel is all about presuppositionlessness. It's all about not presuming anything from the start. And I like that concept because one of the main things that attracted me to Kant is his critique of the unexamined assumptions of traditional metaphysics. Kant regarded philosophy up until Kant as having been a series of castles built on sand. He famously said that metaphysics was once the queen of the sciences, but now she had fallen into disrepute. She used to be a 10, but now she's a mid, man. And that is, in fact, one of the main reasons why I stopped reading philosophy. I think Kant was right. And to this day, a lot of philosophy just consists of enormously elaborate, conceptually sophisticated systems built on top of unexamined assumptions. So, from my perspective, Houlgate's off to a pretty good start here. You've got me intrigued with this concept of presuppositionless philosophy. I want to know what you're going to do with that. And so, Hegel sees Kant himself as having been inadequately critical. He thinks that Kant himself employed some unexamined assumptions. And in particular, he thinks that Kant's metaphysical deduction of the categories, which is what precedes the transcendental deduction. The transcendental deduction is the one that shows that the categories necessarily apply to all objects of possible experience. So before you can do that, you have to figure out what the categories are, and that's what the metaphysical deduction does. And so Kant deduces the categories from the form of judgment, which for Kant is thought. For Kant, thoughts are judgments, and the form of judgment is given by basically Aristotelian term logic. So it turns out for Kant that the categories are deduced basically from Aristotelian term logic, and Hegel doesn't like that. Hegel says, no, Kant, that's a bad boy. You can't just go assuming that the categories are given by Aristotelian term logic. That's not very critical of you. And I think he might have a point there. Alright, so what is your alternative, Hegel? Well, if Pippin's Hegel presumes too much by starting with phenomenology, or thought of being, as Houlgate puts it, what Houlgate's Hegel starts with is ontology, or thought as being. And if you're going to start with being in a way that's truly presuppositionless, you can't just start with your ordinary garden variety beings like tables and chairs, because that would also be to presume too much, and presume things like individuation and concrete determination of beings. So that's no good. What you have to do is you have to start with pure being, which is pure indeterminate immediacy, in Hegel's words. So basically the idea is that you just think the most minimal conception of being that you can, and then stop. Do not pass go, do not collect $200, just chill here for a minute with pure being. Now, what happens is, when you settle down for some Netflix and chill with your new buddy Pure Being, what you find is that unfortunately Pure Being has ghosted you. And so what happened is that precisely because Pure Being was so pure, it was just too pure for this world, and because there was nothing to it other than immediacy and indeterminacy, that caused it to vanish into pure nothing, because there's also nothing to pure nothing other than immediacy and indeterminacy. Alright, so I have been on board up until this point. I have been game. We are finally getting to the fireworks factory. And yet, this is the point where I'm starting to think about diving off the train here. I am not quite on board with this move, Hegel. Okay, so it seems like one of the reasons why you're supposed to start with pure being is because pure being is an irreducible concept, right? You can't define it. It's a primitive concept. You're supposed to just grasp it even though you can't define it. And so it seems to me like of course there's nothing to it, in the sense that you can't define it. It's a primitive concept. But normally you're supposed to be able to have multiple different primitive concepts in your conceptual scheme without them all, melting into one another. So if you try to tell me that pure being immediately vanishes into pure nothing, I am inclined to respond, no it doesn't. So in terms of our progression through Hegel's dialectic here, we're currently on step 2 out of step gazillion, and I've already got some questions. Now, I'm not throwing it out, not throwing the towel in here. What I am going to do is definitely not go through every single step in the dialectic, because our limited time here on this earth is precious. There are 2 other main steps that I wanted to touch on. What I'm going to do is revisit those in a future recording if anyone actually listens to this. If nobody listens, then I will just hoard my precious Hegel knowledge and keep it to myself and never share it with anyone. So, if you made it this far, thank you for listening. You are a beautiful person, and the Hegelian world spirit will soon bless you with bounteous wealth and innumerable numbers of attractive people of your preferred gender who will throw themselves at you with wild abandon. If you didn't make it this far, you are trapped in Hegel's bad infinity. It's pretty much over for you. You're NGMI, and worst of all, you don't even know it. Alright, anyway, until next time.